Hi, everybody. Uh, Good to see you again. Was watching a video today by Thorn Mooney in which she talks about making the transition between reading about witchcraft to actually practicing it. And it was brilliant. I will link it below. Always love her videos. Um, and it was really well done. Mostly what she's talking about is the fact that when somebody's reading about witchcraft, they might not jump into it because they're afraid of fucking up, and sort of the horror stories that get told about people who are attempting to work some sort of magic and things go horribly, horribly wrong. And she tries to calm down those fears and and say that it's okay to make the jump from reading to doing, even though you don't necessarily know what you're doing, because you're not gonna know what you're doing until you actually start doing. Um, and I agree 100%. Practice makes perfect, and making mistakes is the only way you learn what you're doing. And as far as I know, most of the really horrible horror stories are um, overblown or aren't things that happen commonly. I mean, the really nastiest stories I've heard all seem to go back a long time, and I don't know anybody who has really had anything horrible happen as a result. Um, I think it's more of a horror movie thing, the H.P. Lovecraft story. Somebody finds like the Necronomicon and reads an incantation out of it, and the next thing you know, the elder gods are beating down the door trying to eat his soul. And Thorne points out that sort of thing just doesn't happen. If you're just starting out, you, as a general rule, don't have the power to summon up dark elder gods or anything like that. Um, she does tell an amusing story about having set her bookcase on fire in one of her first attempts. But that's just an occupational hazard, regardless of whether you're a newbie or not. I probably started my daily magical practice when she was just a wee small bairn, and just like 3 months ago, I accidentally had a fire get out of control. And you always learn something from situations like that, and what I learned was that the fire extinguisher that I bought for my house about 30 years ago um, still works, even though I've never used it in all that time until now. And I also learned that it puts fires out by spraying this powder on stuff which gets everywhere and is impossible to clean up. That I would have been better off just by throwing a damp towel on the damn thing. Um, you know, and as always, you have to be careful, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared. Uh, I was a Boy Scout a million years ago, and be prepared, the Boy Scout motto, or is it like that? I don't remember. Um, in any event, she already covered all that stuff pretty good, but there are a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about, like the time commitment. Um, Now, I know that there's more than one way that somebody can be jumping into magic. They can be reading about it and want to make the jump, but there's so many different books they can be reading and trying to make the jump from. And there's the ceremonial magic where the first thing you're reading about might be a 4-hour ritual, um, or you could be reading about some sort of folk magic which can you can work as fast as you can burn down a birthday candle, which is probably less than 5 minutes. Um, Most people are going to fall somewhere in between, and most magic that you should be have as part of your daily practice isn't going to just be, the casting of a spell because you need $500 by the end of the month, or you need, the girl down the street to actually look up and notice you when you're walking by. Um, most of the magic in your daily practice is going to be about learning how it works, how to be in touch with spirits or gods or entities, how to be manipulating energy and sensing energy and seeing energy. Um, And all of that can be sort of time consuming. There will always be daily exercises, maybe divinations. It can take a significant amount of time, and if you're going to do it right and actually gain those skills, you should probably be doing it every day. And if you're like me, finding time can be really tough. I don't have any tips to get around that. I mean, between working for a living or going to school and having a family, um, or friends that you have obligations to, um, that means that your daily magical practice has to come out of your spare time, meaning entertainment or sleep. And if you're like me, it's going to come out of sleep because there isn't that much entertainment time to begin with. Of course, the good news is that you're going to be really successful at magic if you really love it. And if you really love it, you're not going to begrudge the entertainment time. Sleep is the more likely. There's a lot of recommendations when you're first starting out that your daily practice should be like very early in the morning, at sunrise or before the sun rises. And it took me a lot of years to actually take that seriously, but the fact is, in the wee small hours of the morning, when it's still dark and when almost everybody who lives around you is asleep, not only are you less likely to be disturbed or have emergencies crop up on the outside world that absolutely have to get a hold of you, but also I find that when most of the world around you is asleep, there's a lot less psychic static, if that makes any sense. You don't have as much free-floating thought forms and emotional explosions just sort of flying through the neighborhood, wandering through the minds of anybody who's trying to be sensitive to anything, um, which gives you a greater control over your own environment and can add to a sense of peace and meditativeness, which is important to make these things work. Um, Finding the time is always going to be tough no matter what time of day you want to do it. It's always going to be demanding, and there are some benefits to that. First of all, by making the time, um, you're actually going to be doing it. It shows that you have the emotional energy necessary to make it work. Furthermore, making a commitment is a big deal to some of the egregores and spirits and entities and gods that you're going to want to be working with. The fact that you're committed enough to make the time is a big sign to that sort of thing. Um, the other thing is that while for a lot of people, when you first start out, there's sort of this interesting period when a lot of magical stuff seems to happen. I've always sort of thought that it was because the powers that be want to encourage you. Thorne points out that a lot of times nothing happens at all, and that can be discouraging, and that you just got to get past it and keep working. And I think both are probably true in a lot of cases. But even if you do get that initial rush of interesting magical stuff happening, eventually that's going to wane off, and you're going to hit plateaus, and you're going to hit periods of time where it just seems to be work. Um, but you do the work, and it eventually pays off. Um, it's important to jump from the reading to the practicing, but the practicing itself, um, for some people, it can become very tedious. Sometimes in your life it can be tedious, and other times it can be exciting. But it's like playing the piano or the guitar or any other skill where you need to have your daily practice, and over time it builds up enormous benefits. I know that we live in a world where the trend is we want what we want and we want it now. And there are types of magic that can provide that sort of thing. A lot of folk magic, although that has a tendency to be more spells to get what you want in the moment or in the short term. There is stuff out there about enlightenment and spiritual advancement that can be done relatively quickly. Um, Still, that kind of magic needs to be recharged on a regular basis too. So again, if you're going to be successful, you need to be doing the working in the long term. And I can't emphasize enough just how much benefit there is from the experiences. I mean, when I started out, I was told to do like three particular rituals, and then quickly a fourth and a fifth were added that needed to be done every single day, and um, I was told pretty much for the rest of your life. Now, I did have a few years there where I stopped, and I think that you do get to a point where rather than what you're reading or what your teacher tells you, you need to make some decisions for yourself and design your own practice and determine what is of value to you. Um, those four original rituals are still a part of my daily practice many, 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 many years later. And in a sense, I had to grow into them. Like the bare basics were easy enough that it was maybe, it only took maybe a total of an hour a day broken up over maybe three periods during the course of the day that were 10, 20 minutes each. Um, but over time, as I learned more about them and more about myself and more about the effects and more about the energies invoked, um, I grew into something bigger behind them, and they themselves unfolded into be more than they were, to the point where they took an enormous amount of time to do rather than getting to be a lesser amount of time. And now, decades later, they're becoming much shorter to do because the pathways to the energies that they invoke are so ingrained in my mind and body and the room that I work in that it takes almost no effort at all to get into the right state of mind and sum it all up. However, those rituals have ended up being springboards to bigger things, which are time consuming for now and will be a long time before they become less so. I would say don't worry about the time constraint. Um, Whatever time you can dedicate to your daily practice, you'll find a way to fill up with something important. And over time, the more important the work is, the more time it may take, but the more interesting things will fill it up. And if you love it, most of the time you'll think it's worth it, or you won't mind because it'll be great. And when you do mind, and when it becomes drudge work, a break isn't a horrible thing, but you don't want to break for too long because, again, you want the benefits of the daily practice. Um, the dedication is something that really pays off, but also perseverance in and of itself is a skill that you want to have throughout your life, whether that be with your day job or with your relationships. Perseverance gets you through all kinds of stuff. Um, Life itself seems to be about perseverance. Sometimes life can seem to be trying to knock you off of a track. And if it's a track worth staying on, perseverance is a big deal. Um, and I mentioned relationships. In a lot of ways, the practice of magic is like relationships. You have a relationship to yourself, and magic is a great deal about self-exploration. There are parts of yourself that have broken off and living in your subconscious that you need to bring back into the fold, and you need to have a relationship with yourself and a relationship with those aspects of yourself You need to have a relationship with your gods. You need to have a relationship with your deities, with the entities you work with the spirits you work with. Um, every every spell, every ritual is like an invocation or an evocation of something, and that thing, even if it's just an energy that you're going to program in some way, is in many ways a living thing, and you need to have a relationship with it. There needs to be an intellectual interchange, an emotional interchange, and from relationships with significant others and parents and siblings and friends that can get complicated, and that can get tedious, and that can get frustrating. But when it's worthwhile, you put in the work and you make the effort and you persevere. And it's going to be the same way with magic every step of the way, because it's a whole area that's bound to relationships. And that's been about 15 minutes. I think that might be all I have to say on the subject for now, anyway. I hope somebody sees this message in a bottle going out into the mass mind. And I will see you again some other time. Have a good one. Bye bye.